Next guest, Senator Markwayne Mullin, who will all be available on demand at the Will Cain Show on YouTube. So joining me now for story number 2 is Senator Markwayne Mullin here on the Will Cain Show. Senator, great to have you.
Hey, brother, how you doing?
I'm good. So, by the way, speaking of competitive, I have to ask you because it was just left off in my last conversation with Pete Hegseth. So you did almost get in a fight on the floor of the Senate?
On the floor of the Senate? No, it was in a hearing room. I wouldn't say a fight. I mean, we're a long ways for a fight. I just get paid to fight. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna just fight somebody for the heck of it. But I think you may be referring to Sean O'Brien, the Teamster president, that wanted to run his mouth a little bit and call me out and say anytime, any place. And I just calmly said, we can fight for charity, or we can do it right here, right now, if you'd like to. In fact, I think my words were, "This is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can sell it right here." Something to that nature.
How dare I assume that would happen on the floor of the Senate? It was just in a hearing room, and we all know among the things that take place in Senate hearing rooms, that would be one of the more tame events to unfold in a Senate hearing room.
And people ask me if I was mad about that. I wasn't. I mean, like I said, I used to get paid. I fought professionally. I just, we just don't do that in Oklahoma, and I don't like bullies. And I mean, really, this is really what it comes down to. I don't like bullies. And if I grew up with a real bad speech impediment, and I had to wear braces on my legs, and so I couldn't argue with you, and I couldn't run from you, and so I learned how to fight as a young kid. And so I tell, not everybody has the ability to stand up to bullies, but if you do, someone's got to stop them. That was kind of my whole point there. Some people said I could have handled it different, but I handled it like we do in Oklahoma, I guess.
Well, speaking of that, by the way, I mean, it's part of your bio. People know this. You fought MMA for a while, and I think your family in general, is it wrestling that I think your kids wrestle. You may have wrestled. So this is a bit. I mean, fighting MMA, big part of the Markwayne Mullin story.
Yeah, listen. My wife is a professional kickboxer. She's I think she's a 3rd degree black belt in karate. And she may be 4th degree, but and she, I mean, she's tough. I got 2 boys wrestling for Oklahoma State as we speak. One that's committed to OU next year. He's a senior, and then I got 3 girls that are tougher than my boys, and they're not quite old enough yet, but I'm sure they'll probably go someplace and wrestle. But it's just it's a discipline for us, right? So it's something we do as a family. In my family, you wrestle and like it, or wrestle and don't like it, so choose your attitude. And because it's a life experience, and I think life mimics so many one-on-one sports. I don't care if you're running cross country or running track, even if you're playing golf, which I don't play golf, but you really don't have anybody to blame but yourself when you screw up. And so it's one of those things, you just got to suck it up, take your licks as they come, and take your victories as they come, but you don't celebrate long, because next day or later on that day, you got somebody else coming after you.
I want to ask you about the Senate border bill. I want to ask you about foreign aid funding specifically to Ukraine. But I'm fascinated by your biography, and I want to ask you a few more questions on that.
Sure.
You're from Eastern Oklahoma, small town. I'm fascinated by this area of the country. I'm from North Texas. I'm from Sherman, Texas.
Right. No problem.
Right between us, you could draw a 90-degree angle from basically where I grew up through where you grew up to, I know you have this poster I read, to Arkansas, in the home of like True Grit. And I just got done watching the series Bass Reeves on Paramount, which basically that's the area from your home to my home is where the entire thing takes place. It's a unique part of the country, and it historically rough, still impoverished in many ways. And you have a unique tie to it. I mean, you're the only sitting member of the Senate who's a Native American. You're a member of the Cherokee Nation. What does all that bring to you? Like it's easy to read how it's unique in your bio. How does that make you unique as a man, as a senator?
Honestly, when you grow up where I grew up, and by the way, I'm sitting right here on my ranch. I'm in actually in my office. It's in my barn, and I'm looking out at the horse right now, using the bathroom in front of me as we speak outside my window. I mean, it's where we live. Arkansas is right beside me. And growing up here in Indian country, being Cherokee or being Native American isn't anything special, because everybody is. No one makes a big deal of it. Everybody grew up using IHS, Indian Health Services. Nobody had health insurance because everybody went to the Indian Health Services. The county I'm in right now, it's out of 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma, it's the poorest county in the state. and it's way we were always raised. So I didn't think anything special about being Cherokee until I went to Washington, D.C. And Tom Cole, who's Chickasaw at the time, he says, "Congratulations, we just doubled our Native American population in Congress." At that time, it was just him and I. Now, when I went to the Senate, I'm the first Cherokee and the first Native American to serve in the Senate from Oklahoma since 1925, and the only current member that's a Native American. And the perspective really isn't anything different than anybody else. And I get to ask this question, but really, we all are elected to represent our backyards, right? And we represent our backyards by it being our life experiences and the way we're raised. So I just represent Oklahoma. I was born and bred here. My family's been here. We came over on what they historically, I get pushback when I say this, but historically it's referred to as a volunteer walk. It was the Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears had two walks. One was what they consider the volunteer walk, which happened in the 1830s, and then the Trail of Tears, which was a forced walk. That was a second walk. We've been right here in that area since then. I mean, we crossed Arkansas, which is just a half mile to my east from here, and we settled. We haven't moved. So I will tell you honestly, when I first got to Washington, D.C., though, I was a little bit intimidated. I was like, what do I have to bring? I got these guys sitting across from me that's graduated from Harvard and Yale and MIT and Duke and all these fancy degrees and law degrees. And I grew up milking cows and working cattle and breaking horses and doing plumbing work. And what do I have to bring that's different? I mean, I got punched in the face for money. I mean, that's not really the background that people have in Congress, but it also is unique because it's the way our founding fathers wanted to set us up, right? We wanted to be set up by not a ruling class, but from different individuals. And it's the great thing about America is that you don't have to be from royalty. You don't have to be from a bloodline that's always been in politics. That's not the way it is in America. You could just say, I got fed up. And why I ran for office is because I got fed up. They shut down a company we had that employed about a little over 100 people. The EPA did it. And I thought, well, if my problem isn't my ability to hire and fire right, my ability is the fact that some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. shut me down, then that's where I'm going. And that happened underneath Obama. And so the background that I bring is just Oklahoma. I think my background is no different than anybody else that lives in this state. We all have similar backgrounds.
I love that. I love what you just had to say. I love your background. Of course, it's not exact, but it's one I'm familiar with. You know, by the way, they always say the biggest hatreds are small divisions. You know, I'm taught that I was raised on the right side of the Red River. You know, and there's a reason Texas doesn't fall off into the Gulf of Mexico.
We learned how to do two things really good. You guys don't even know how to wrestle in Texas. And then we know how to play football really well. So we got that. You may be bigger in landmass, but we're bigger in heart.
I'm gonna let you have the wrestling, but the football thing, I think you're on a limited timeline on that one. No, but the small difference is that I understand your lifestyle, I understand how you grew up, and I appreciate that there's somebody in the Senate who has your background, who has your mindset. Let's apply that. Let's apply that to the current efforts in the Senate. Look, I'm having trouble, and you're in the Senate, okay? And I don't know. I do know that you have, you believe you've adopted an America First ideology to some extent, asking how it serves America. And you, even more importantly, should be asking, I think more importantly, how does it serve Oklahoma? Because that's your job. But tell me how, for example, we'll use one, because foreign aid is currently a matter of much debate. How does it serve the people of Oklahoma to be funding to the tune of record numbers of billions a war in Ukraine? And I don't care about good guys or bad guys. I'm not here to defend one side or the other. I'm not here for any of that. I just want to know, why is it important to American peace and prosperity?
So I will tell you, I had this same question before I went to D.C. And as I stated earlier in the program, we all make decisions based on two things: the way we're raised and our life experiences. My life experiences have changed drastically since I've been in D.C. Sitting on the Intel Committee, sitting on the Senate Armed Services Committee, you get privy to a lot more information than what just the average person walking around there. So let's talk about why it's important to us. Let's use Ukraine, for example. Ukraine is the first area that everybody gets spun up about. Go back to, first of all, our federal obligation. Now, like it or not, we didn't getting this agreement. You and I, it was before our time. But in 1994, December of 94, we signed the Budapest Memorandum with Ukraine that said that if they were to give up their arsenal of nuclear weapons, which, by the way, was the second largest in the world at the time, second to us, if they were to give up that arsenal, that the United States and the might behind it would defend them in the case that they were invaded specifically by Russia. You can Google the Budapest Memorandum, and it's got its own Wikipedia page. So we have a federal obligation to them. But more importantly, what do we get out of it? For 20 years, we've been fighting a war on terror. And our conventional weapon system had kind of rotted away. It kind of got outdated because you're not using missile defense. You're not using air defense. You're not using ships. You're not using things to knock down drones. You're really trying to have big bullets to go through rock and clay walls. You're worried about IEDs, and so you're more worried about MRAPs and up armoring or Humvees than you are about anything in the air or in the water. When we started this fight with Ukraine, we realized that our defense industry was way down. For instance, 155 rounds, Russia makes more a month in 155 rounds than we make an entire year inside the United States. We're spending $2 million to bring down a $100,000 drone or a $50,000 drone. We never fought drones in Ukraine. So our defense industry has actually gained, and I say Ukraine, in the Middle East, our defense industry is actually helping get spun up because of the war in Ukraine to some degree. So what do we get out of it? We're getting prepared to fight if we have to with China. And we're not going to choose to fight against China. We're not going to choose to fight against Putin. But there's one guy that President Xi in China is making that decision for us. We're not being the aggressors. They're being the aggressors. They're the ones being aggressive.
May I?
And Pacific. Go ahead.
May I interject a question? I find your answer interesting in this respect. You gave me an answer, and there's going to be more because, as you said, you become privy to more information. First, a question, and then I want to push you on something. Sure. This is a little bit off, but you bring up that you're privy to intelligence briefings, and I appreciate that the intelligence agencies, I appreciate and I don't appreciate, are far and wide and vast, and that means there's great people and bad people, and trustworthy people and untrustworthy people inside of our own intelligence agencies. But when I see stories that just came out, for example, of the CIA helping to begin the investigations into President Trump, I think a worthy question to ask going forward is, how much can you trust what you're being told in those intel briefings? Just because you have the three-letter moniker CIA doesn't mean that what you're getting is A, truthful, or B, in the best interest of America.
You don't. The people that are appointed by the presidents, you don't trust them. It's a trust but verify. So that's why CODELs, congressional trips that we do that a lot of people complain about, there are some people that abuse the CODELs, don't get me wrong. But if you're doing them right, you're going to in-country, you're getting the in-country, the chief of station briefings. You're going to the FOBs, forward operating bases. You're getting away from Washington, D.C. that are politically appointed positions, and you're getting to the guys that are in the field. You're getting your eyes on it, you're getting your ears on it, and you're getting your hands on it, and you can get the information you need. Then you go back to those briefings and you push the political appointees on why they're not telling us the truth. Why are they redacting it? Because if you just rely on the briefings that the White House sends you, you will get nothing but their story that they want. You have to travel. I was in 17 countries last year alone. A little kid from Westville, Oklahoma, that never really left a 250-mile radius around where I live today, all of a sudden is going to 17 countries in 1 week. It's humbling, but it's also important because it's fact-checking. Because someone's going to have a presence around the world. And if it's not us, then who is it going to be? Because, by the way, the person that has a presence around the world also controls the economy too. And you got to think about that. We can't be an isolationist country because we're not an isolationist economy. Our economy is widespread. And is there
an argument to be made, Senator, on that note? And I'm just trying to have a conversation with you. I don't interrupt to debate. I just find some of the things you're saying. Yeah. I just had this conversation with Pete Hegseth, my co-host on Fox and Friends Weekend, about, this. I'm watching Alexander the Great, and we were talking about empire building. If you're not growing, are you declining? Jimmy Johnson once said, when it came to sports, there's no status quo. You're getting better, you're getting worse. Right. But that may be true. That may be true. But I'm curious, because you've brought them up more than once now, it seems like America's approach to being involved in the world, as you just described it, has been rudimentary explanation here, but bombs and bases, drones and bases, military footprint, where China's taken a different approach. They're intertwining their influence, their economy, they're peddling influence, they're intermingling their businesses in Africa and Latin America, all across the globe. Is there not I'm not saying China, good guy, America, bad guy, obviously. What I'm saying is there not something there to learn from your adversary?
Yeah, so I would say that you have to look at a different approach. We look at politics as 4 years. They're in a 100-year Belt and Road Initiative. It's called One Belt, One Road. So understand the differences. We are involved in a lot more. Our foreign aid through our USA aid, our State Department, we're not just bombs and stuff. We're there in the case they need it. So like Ukraine, they're in the case and need it. We're in all these other countries. We're not in fights with them. We don't have troops there. But we may have a base there that's in the region that they want influence because they want to know that we're there for Overwatch protection. But typically what we're looking at is actually shipping lanes. So One Belt, One Road Initiative, it is to get, you got to think about what President Xi is trying to do here. He's trying to encompass the world in one belt, one road with exit ramps that go to China. That means he wants everybody to be reliant on them. And so when they do that, they got to control the shipping lane. So what you're seeing now is China isn't investing in their economy. They're investing in areas so they can build a port to control the shipping lanes. So where they put a port, they also put their military. You start looking at what they're trying to do by encompassing the economy. 80% of the cranes right now that used in all shipping ports right now, 80%. The technology that was built and the technology that uses the information to know what's in the container to ship it to what ship is controlled in China, Beijing, China, 80% of it right now. When you start looking at the currency, they're pushing real hard in Brazil currently for Brazil to start recognizing the yen as a currency. When you start realizing that the road is complete, and then they start doing the off ramps, what does the belt mean? Why do they say one belt, one road? The belt in China has two meanings. It's the traditional meaning: hold something up, hold something together. That's your pants. And also on the other side of it is a way to insult or to correct. It's a belting. Used to, they would take their belt off, like in the Middle East where they throw the shoe at you. In China, they would take their belt off because it was a cloth belt at the time, and they would slap you across the face. And it was a form of humiliation and correction. And so the belt is when you start complaining about them, they're going to tighten their belt around their waist, and they're trying to tighten the economy, tighten the world, make them be reliant on China. And if you don't respond to them, then they're going to discipline you and slap you across the face. That's what we're dealing with right now with China. That's the One Belt, One Road, 100-year initiative. United States, we can't get out of it through presidential election cycles. And if we don't take a different approach to it, then we are going to find ourselves greatly behind, which we are today. 10 years ago, China only had an interest in roughly 10% of the nations around the world, 10%. Today, they're approaching over 70%. In South America right now, they're in every single country but one in South America, but one. 6 years ago, they didn't have a presence in South America.
I want to go back to by the way, small town guy from Oklahoma, plumbing business, sure has made himself very informed on geopolitics. I think your answers are appreciated and the effort and time you've put into that. I want to go back. I don't know. I want to be sensitive to your time, so you can also just let us know on air if we're pushing into rounding up the horses. The answer on Ukraine, that our military was behind. You pointed out several different things, specifics where we were behind Russia, for example, on ammunition or whatever it may be. And that your answer to me was, this has been an opportunity to spin up our military-industrial complex. That answer from you is going to strike some as like, well, that's exactly what I thought. It's a big laundering operation for the military-industrial complex. Now,
yeah.
You could be saying the same thing, though, Senator. You could be saying the same thing. You're kind of saying we need to. So here's my question for you. I think this is a fair statement. Over the last 20 years, Nobody in the globe has been more militarily active than the United States of America. We have been, throughout largely the Middle East, militarily active. If our military industrial complex has allowed itself to somehow fall behind another power, and in this case, we'll talk specifically about Russia, who to some extent has been exposed as not quite the great might that we might have all thought militarily, Russia. If we've fallen behind Russia, I would think there's something wrong with our military industrial complex and their ability to respond to our needs and efficiently deliver our needs that should be addressed beyond, hey, here's a new war to trial out stuff that might be needed in the military industrial complex. I don't think that I'm having trouble with this war is what was needed to get the military up to speed.
I don't want you to think that that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying if people want to look at what we're doing up to date right now, majority of our money or majority of the money we sent to them has been through what we consider out-of-date shells, out-of-date equipment, out-of-date stuff that we would normally be blowing up, munitions, air defense, that we'd be blowing up in McAllister at noon every single day. McAllister, Oklahoma is a munition depot, and every day it sounds like thunder's going off at noon because we're using the spent rounds. So 75% of the aid package that the Senate passed, 75% of it goes to replenish our munitions and restock them. So what we did, though, is when you start talking about that, you got to start looking at what we've been fighting. Our military defense industry was focused on what our needs was for a war on terror. We wasn't having to focus on air defense. We wouldn't have to worry about ships. We definitely weren't having to worry about drones. Now that we're seeing what a conventional fight was, so one's a war on terror. Now we're switching to a conventional. We're making a move to a conventional war, which China and Russia had been focusing on. While we were worrying about IEDs, they were worrying about getting supersonic missiles, which we hadn't even started on. When we were worried about getting MRAPs, China was worried about building ships. Now they're building ships at the tune of 30-1 that the United States is doing. And so we're having to change our defense industry. So what the war on Ukraine did is it woke us up and said, oh, hold on a second. We've got behind from what a conventional war actually looks like. Instead of fighting guys that run around in Toyota Tacomas with a 50 cal mounted on it with a rag around their head, we're now fighting guys that it's conventional war. They're a conventional army. These guys are fighting the same tools with the same technology that we have. I mean, we were fighting guys that hadn't even had night vision, and so we could win all of our fights in the night. We're fighting guys now that they have that same technology that we have. And so we're having to change. The whole defense industry is having to move, and then we're realizing we can't keep up with the amount of shells that is required to fight in Ukraine. How would we be able to fight two fronts at one time? God forbid we have to take China on and Russia on at the same time.
Right.
So we're using this as an opportunity not to launder money, but to get better prepared for what our enemies might bring to us, because it's peace through strength. Reagan believed in that. We won the Cold War because we were able to outproduce and outpace the arms race in Soviet Union, and we broke them because they couldn't keep up with us, because they feared the technology that we had. No one's fearing our technology today. And if we don't have something for them to fear, then there's nothing to keep them from pushing their will on around the world.
By the way, when I use the term money laundering, that's a loaded term, and it wasn't the right term for me to choose in this particular application. What would have been the more appropriate term for me to choose would be sort of and look, this isn't a debate point, but this is the way many people see this. Like it's a political payoff to a huge constituency that's ever present in Washington. That's the military industrial complex. I'm not arguing to you that that's the case. I'm telling you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you'll say to me what?
Well, it's kind of at our own doing when you start looking at this. It's so stupid. Everybody wants DC to operate like a business, and yet we don't. We don't even it drives me nuts. So what happens inside the DOD, they talk about these Boeing or all these other organizations that have huge contracts. And I hate to just single out Boeing, but I really don't want to go down the list and start naming people. But we start using these guys as an example because they have billions of dollars worth of contracts for the defense industry. But what happens is because of the rules that Congress has passed, there's so many checks and balances that's put in place, the small guy really can't get into it because the paperwork and the amount of auditing that takes place to get a contract like that with the Department of Defense really can only be a publicly traded company. So when we have a small company that comes up and tries to sell to the Department of Defense, and they say, yeah, we'd like to give you this contract, but since it's over 500 million, because this is a case, in one case, since it's over 500 million, we can't do business with you unless you sell to one of these other guys, because they're a publicly traded company and they've already got cleared through Congress to be able to handle the contract. So you're going to have to sell, and they'll have to buy the product. And then the product goes from costing us, let's say, I'll just use round numbers, $100,000 for a piece of equipment. Now that contract has markups on it, and that contract is going to cost us $175,000. And I get arguments like this all the time inside the Senate Armed Services Committee when we're having briefings, especially classified briefings, is why do we continue to do this? And they keep coming back to us to say, if Congress wants to change that, then Congress needs to change the rules. And then when we go to change the rules, people are saying that we're just trying to get bought off so we can give one of our friends a contract that's favorable for them to the DOD. And it's like a lose-lose situation.
Well, I think the best example of this is I've been reading. It's 600 pages, so audience, just give me some time. I've referenced a lot. The biography of Elon Musk, where he did this exact thing with NASA. He's like, look, cost plus is a dumb business model, and it's incredibly inefficient. And so he presented an option of space travel that was predicated upon outcomes, like any entrepreneur would, and it's revolutionized that industry. One last thing, and then I want to ask you about the border really quickly, but one last thing on this. I don't think so. If I asked you, set aside the Budapest Memorandum, what is in the best interest of Americans today? Why is funding a war in Ukraine? Like, what do I care if Russia takes a chunk of Ukraine, whatever it may be? And I'm not trying to be callous, I'm not trying to be cold, but like, my job, your job, is to understand and serve the interest of Americans. And if I ask you directly, how does this serve the interest of Americans? Am I correct in hearing you out in this conversation because it prepares us for the next existential war?
No, there's a lot of tentacles to this. Let's go to what Ukraine has to offer. For instance, Ukraine has the largest rare earth mineral deposit, arguably in the world, definitely in Europe, but arguably in the world. The only person that would rival that is the rare earth mineral deposit in China. The next one to that is in Afghanistan. So if you start looking at where we're moving as a world, do you want the alliance between China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia controlling something that's we're using in every one of our batteries, every one of our cars because they go in the chips, every one of our phones, satellite technology, everything we're using, and we don't have the minerals here inside the United States. And if we do, we can't get past the environmentalists to actually go mine them to begin with. So that's one. Two, they control also the second world supply of food to that region next to Russia. So you start thinking about the destabilization that Russia all of a sudden controls, that they control the minerals, they control the shipping lanes and the food. Third, talk about gas. The only person that can rival Russia inside Europe for gas, meaning for heating cases, and we see Russia use gas as a leverage point all over Europe, is Ukraine once again. Ukraine has the second largest pipeline next to Russia in Europe, and they supply the biggest chunk of that. The second one is their nuclear power plant, which also supplies power. So you start thinking that Ukraine may not just be Ukraine. Ukraine is a central power source that Russia desperately wants, which is why Putin chose to go there. They could have went into Georgia. They could have went Azerbaijan. They could have went into any of these other countries they wanted to, but they need the resources that Ukraine has. And if Russia is allowed to get the resources, they'll control the economy, because the power, energy, is the backbone of the economy. Without reliable and affordable energy, you cannot have a reliable and affordable economy. Without that, I'll show you a third world country. So if Russia all of a sudden controls the energy to the entire Europe area, they will control that entire economy.
All right, we've gone longer than we anticipated, which I'm happy with, and I hope that you're okay and pleased as well. So, but I wanted to hit the border before we go. You were on Fox and Friends before the release of the Senate border bill, which came under huge criticism. At that time, I believe you were talking to my co-host, Pete Hegseth. You said, just give it a minute. Let's read the bill.
Right.
You advocated for patience. I think afterwards you ended up not, you can correct whatever I say here, clarify. I think you ended up not supporting the way that turned out. I think what many of us think is, why do we need a bill? Like, why is it necessary to pass a law where it seems like everything is available? All we're lacking here is enforcement.
That is actually a really good argument, and you technically don't need the bill to have to secure the border. Biden could absolutely reverse the policies and the executive orders she put in place and went back to what Trump wanted and Trump had in place, which was when we had a secure border. But one thing that Trump couldn't get done is he couldn't change the asylum rules and he couldn't change the parole process. And in fact, when he tried to change the asylum rules, what ended up happening is they took him to court and the court overruled his executive orders. And so the asylum process has to change. And so instead of them just being able to come in and say, I fear my government, no proof of burden on them, they can simply come in, we give them parole, and they have to show up in 6 to 8 years while they're here legally, and we have to support them in the United States. We had to change that policy. And what Trump wanted to basically do is go back to what the pact said, like Canada and Mexico is. You have to claim asylum in first country. We have a first country policy that says with China, Mexico, or with Mexico, the United States, and Canada that says you cannot claim asylum in my country if you come through one of these countries first. You have to claim asylum in the first country you go to. We're the only one that doesn't enforce that. Trump tried to reverse that. There in this policy or this border bill, we were actually trying to make that change. And then in the parole process, instead of just claiming it and automatically getting accepted it, you had to actually prove the burden that you had credible fear in the country and there was no safe place for you to go to along the way, which would have been Mexico, because it's considered a safe country. You'd had to claim asylum there. That would, and this is what Trump was saying, if I do that, that'll keep the flow of these 170 other countries that's crossing Mexico, these individuals from 170 different countries crossing Mexico. It'll keep Mexico start securing their own border on their southern side, because otherwise these individuals have to claim asylum there. So they don't want to be invaded either. That was what we were trying to get done with this parole bill to begin with, not to secure the border. The border could be secured today if the Democrats wanted to do it. But in order to have this process from going farther down the road, if Trump gets in office, which let's pray to God he does, then he won't have to go to court. He can immediately enforce this part that Joe Biden won't enforce.
You're absolutely right about the asylum process. It's beyond enforcement of the border. It's the biggest issue that has to be solved. I don't know that the prices or the compromises, and I know governing is about compromise, but I don't know that the prices and the compromise that were required to go along with that asylum process was what's best. But we got to fix asylum process. Hey, am I correct in one of my producers told me that you have a quote? Did you say something like everybody needs to get punched in the face every once in a while, or at least once in their life?
Yes, I did say that, yes. Every now and then you need to be checked.
Is it once in your life or every once in a while?
Every once in a while, you need to be corrected. It's okay. I mean, sometimes you get a little too big for your britches and someone needs to correct you. Unless you live with a wife like me, who's happy to correct me all the time, then every now and then you need to be checked at the door.
Well, Mike, the skateboarder, dotted my eye in 8th grade. It swole up. He had a fighting ring on, so it cut it and swole it. So I checked that box.
Yeah.
I do remember it.
Deserve it, or is he being a bully?
It was a stupid middle school. How did we end up in this fight type situation? You know, two dogs passing each other in the hallway. You know, and all of a sudden you're like, why did you guys start fighting? To the two dogs, I don't know to this day why we started fighting. But I need one. I mean, it's been a while. I could probably use one. That's not an invitation for you or anyone else. But I don't
imagine you're one of those keyboard warriors that talk real strong with the keyboard, but yet you won't back it up when you see somebody in face to face. Those are the individuals that I'm referring to.
Well, this has been a pleasure, Senator Mark. Oh, by the way, it's true. Markwayne, your mom. I read your mom gave you, what is it, 2 uncles' names, or your dad and an uncle, but then on the birth certificate, but didn't go back and edit it. She couldn't decide, and so she put them both down. Or did she forget the space? What happened?
This is going to set me up for criticism. They thought I was going to be a girl. And so when I was born, they didn't have a guy's name picked out. I had 2 uncles that didn't have any boys. And so they were in the delivery room literally arguing about who I was going to be named after. And my mom got sick of it and just wrote one name down on the birth certificate and never went. She had intentions of making one of a middle name, and she never did. So it's stuck, Markwayne. And I keep thinking someone's going to name after me at some point, so I won't be the only person there they Google.
Do you have a middle name as well, in addition to the double first name?
No, just Markwayne Mullin. No middle name.
There we go. All right. I think it works. This has been a real pleasure. Thanks for talking substance and having some fun with me as well today here on the Wheel Cage. I hope to have you again, Senator.
Anytime. Appreciate you. Thank you.